devastation, and darkness. Biblical prophecy predicts that when the fourth trumpet sounds, hell will break loose in the heavens.
And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, the sun became black as the sackcloth of hair.
Book of Revelation, Revelation 6, verse 12. The sixth sign, the darkening of the sun.
You have the sun turning dark and the moon turning towards blood. It's a transitional period into what would be called the wrath of God or the Great Tribulation.
When the prophecies talk about the sun turning dark, I don't think it's going to be anything that's caused by man. I think this is God, in essence, turning the light out.
The sun has been an object of fear and veneration for humankind since the beginning of time. Solar eclipses are such terrifying experiences for our ancestors that they often unleash widespread panic. But the dire predictions of this sign warn of something more than the temporary effects of an eclipse. Could the sixth sign mean that our sun might be darkened permanently? Could we plunge into a cosmic darkness so devastating that it would be interpreted by many as an act of God or a sign of the apocalypse? Surprisingly, scientists say that the possibility does exist. And ironically, a planet-wide darkness could start with the brightest light in the universe.
Gamma ray is a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's basically light.
Gamma rays are created by electromagnetic radiation and are emitted during radioactive decay.
If normal light is like a feather hitting you on the cheek, a gamma ray is like a bullet. A single gamma ray photon has 1 billion times the energy of a visible light photon. That's what makes them dangerous. If they impact a cell, they can disrupt the cell. If they impact DNA, they can actually shatter or alter the DNA molecule.
While gamma rays were discovered over a century ago, we are only now just starting to learn how deadly they can be. As Dr. Neil Garrels explains, the big breakthrough in gamma ray research comes during the Cold War.
Nuclear weapons produce flashes of gamma rays. And in 1962, President Kennedy signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty with the Soviets. And this treaty outlawed testing of nuclear weapons above the Earth's atmosphere. The United States built a series of satellites to monitor this treaty. So these satellites had gamma ray detectors on them. And lo and behold, they actually discovered flashes of gamma rays.
But the gamma rays are not coming from Russia.
Multiple satellites would see the flash at the same time, and it wasn't coming from the Earth. It was coming from deep space.
When scientists finally locate the source of these rays, they discover one of the largest explosions in the universe, the gamma ray burst.
Gamma ray bursts are second really only to the Big Bang as far as energy output. As far as we know, there are no bigger explosions in the universe. It's caused by a supernova, a very massive star that explodes. The inner part of the star collapses down and it forms a black hole right at the center. And what happens is it focuses twin beams of energy that shoot out in opposite directions from the black hole itself. They're like cosmic blowtorches, death rays. These things scream out at the speed of light, and the energy that is packed into these beams is staggering. It's unimaginable.
In roughly 10 seconds, these two tightly focused beams transmit more energy than our sun will emit over its entire 15 billion year lifespan.
There are almost 1 million of these going off every day. This is happening all the time.
You can talk about asteroid impacts, you can talk about solar flares, you can talk about black holes passing through the solar system. But I think pound for pound, you don't get anything more terrifying than a gamma ray burst.
Anything within 1,000 light years that lies in the path of gamma ray beams is simply vaporized. Fortunately, there are no stars close enough to vaporize our planet. but the radiation from a gamma ray burst even several thousand light years away can still devastate the Earth. In fact, there's evidence that our planet may have already been hit.
Several 100 million years ago, back when the trilobites were the kings of the Earth, these little crab-like guys that were swimming around in the ocean, it's possible that a gamma ray burst actually went off close enough to the Earth to wipe out these trilobites and a lot of life on the Earth. This was one of the biggest mass extinctions. It was even bigger than the one that wiped out the dinosaurs.
A nearby gamma ray burst will clearly pose a danger to life on our planet. But according to prophecy, the sun and moon will be darkened. How can this blinding flash of light send our world into darkness? The answer lies 8,000 light years away.
The star is called WR104. It's a funny name, but that's what we call it. And it's close enough to hurt us, and it may be aimed at us.
It's reaching the end of its lifetime, and it could, any year, blow up.
So what will happen if this distant star explodes?
You would have literally no warning, because gamma rays themselves are light. And so they're traveling at the speed of light, and since nothing can travel faster, as soon as they hit the Earth, that's it. That's our warning. So basically, we would see it, and that would be it.
Even though it's 8,000 light years away, WR104 could trigger a devastating change in our skies. Strangely enough, it's this massive blast of light that could plunge us into the darkness foretold by the 7 signs.
A gamma ray burst alters the Earth's atmospheric chemistry. It can create a layer of what is essentially smog, a thick reddish-brown, dark layer of smog that would block sunlight, and that would actually lower the Earth's temperature. It could cause an ice age.
Photosynthesis will be interrupted. Plants across the globe will die. It's also possible the sudden change will wipe out the critical bottom layer of the food chain.
Changing the microscopic life in the ocean changes the very base of the food chain. If you were to kill all of the plankton in the ocean in a very short period of time, life would stop immediately.
The whole system collapses. It's a big chain. Everything is linked to each other. The whole thing's going to fall apart.
Trapped beneath darkened skies on a frozen, dying planet, the effects of a gamma ray burst will be a nightmare for mankind. One foretold by the Bible centuries ago, a prophecy that for some will signal the end times.
At the end of time, things will be out of order. Things will be turned on their heads. The sun, which is a source of light, turns to black, and the meaning assigned to this upheaval is the imminent working of God's will to bring the world to a final end.
I don't think God needs to use anything specifically scientific to make it happen. But he could. I mean, if it's a gamma ray that causes this, he'll use whatever he has at his disposal to make it work.
In the vastness of space, there's no way to know if this sign will happen.
Everything in the universe is a matter of probabilities and chance. If your star and your planet happens to be near another massive star that's blowing up, that's it.
But the threat is out there. And at 8,000 light years away, WR104 may have already exploded, and its deadly gamma rays could already be heading our way. And as frightening as this sign is, the biblical march toward apocalypse is about to get even worse. It's a disaster that conjures up images of hell itself. Scientists at Yellowstone take measurements. Something strange is happening. Could it be the site of a future biblical disaster? Could it be part of the 7 signs?
And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain was cast into the sea.
In the second trumpet judgment, it talks about a great mountain falling into the ocean. That could be an asteroid, but it uses the term mountain, and then it uses the term fire. A mountain bursting out of the ocean, erupting with fire.
It's one of the most dangerous and destructive forces on Earth. Could one of the 7 signs be a volcano? A look back at ancient history provides a clue. The images of fire and brimstone that define hell were inspired by the flaming magma and sulfuric gas emitted by volcanoes. Like many violent natural events, volcanic eruptions are seen by our Christian ancestors as the result of God's wrath. Mount Vesuvius erupts in 79 AD. During the same period, John of Patmos writes the book of Revelation. The eruption buries the Roman city of Pompeii. Hot volcanic ash entombs thousands of victims for all time, frozen in their final agony. Many early Christians view this as God's punishment of the pagan Roman Empire, exacted for persecuting their Christian brethren.
A volcanic eruption is an indication that God is in control of the earth, that He is the one who controls these natural phenomena.
We know too well the power of volcanoes today. Mount St. Helens in 1980, Mount Pinatubo in 1991. These eruptions and countless others have caused humans pain and suffering on an immense scale. But for a volcanic eruption to be recognized today as among the 7 signs, it will have to be of unprecedented size and destructiveness.
The result of this great mountain-like object falling into the ocean is destroying life on planet Earth.
Are there, in fact, volcanoes large enough to cause such an apocalypse? Science now confirms that there are, and just as the prophecy describes, they can be hidden in oceans or even right below us. It's a phenomenon called supervolcanoes.
A supervolcano is any volcano that emits 100 cubic kilometers or more of ash in a single eruption.
That's about 100 to 150 times more than Mount St. Helens ejected in 1980. And there are supervolcanoes scattered across the globe.
Taupo in New Zealand, a popular fishing resort on the North Island. Santorini in the Aegean. The Campi Flegrei, just west of Naples, where several 100,000 people live.
There are at least 8 supervolcanoes around the world. But they're hard to find, since they usually don't take the form of a mountain.
Most volcanoes, when they erupt explosively, leave a crater, a violent expulsion of magma that blows its roof off. When a very large eruption occurs, it leaves something called a caldera, which is a much more structured, bowl-shaped depression that has relatively steep walls. It's typically tens of kilometers across, and it forms by a settling of the roof rocks down into what used to be the magma chamber.
There are several supervolcano calderas within the United States. One of the most beautiful sights may also pose the greatest threat of devastation.
Yellowstone is a large volcanic crater measuring 35 by 45 miles.
It's just shocking to imagine a single eruption that would evacuate so much magma and create a valley where there was nothing.
But that's exactly what happened at Yellowstone. More than once.
Yellowstone has had 3 very big eruptions that were hundreds of cubic kilometers or more. The most recent of them happened 640,000 years ago.
We know that Yellowstone has erupted in the past. We know it could erupt again in the future. The question is when.
Yellowstone Plateau is rising at a rate of about 0.6 of an inch, a little bit more than ½ an inch a year. This is a product of molten rock beneath that plateau. We just don't have enough data to say what the probability is of this culminating in a big eruption.
The data scientists do have indicates that an eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano isn't likely, at least not for a few thousand years. But scientific data doesn't sway true believers in the 7 signs prophecy.
When it comes to science and the scripture, I have never seen anything, when you really examine it, that science can disprove the scripture.
However, believers examining the prophecy and scientists investigating the data do agree on one thing. If a supervolcano does erupt, our prospects will be bleak.
The first thing that would happen would be a series of minor eruptions. They don't erupt simultaneously around the entire circumference of the caldera. Instead, they punch a single hole through the edge of the caldera, and then they unzip the caldera rim by migrating that eruption center around its circumference.
Once this happens, the entire floor of the Yellowstone caldera will collapse. That will blast a gigantic column of scalding volcanic gas and ash up to 20 kilometers high into the atmosphere.
That cloud collapses in places and produces a ground-hugging mass of hot ash that runs perhaps several hundred miles down river valleys.
Anyone and anything within that range would almost certainly be buried and killed.
As we've learned from many previous eruptions, the victims suffer a terrible death.
What kills people is the ingestion of hot gases that cook you from the inside.
The ash that remains airborne is carried westward by the prevailing winds.
11 western states, including a substantial part of California, become blanketed in ash. You're looking at a destruction of the grain belt in the Midwest, upon which a substantial part of the world's population living at margin depends. And with that, then, a realignment of the geopolitical balance of power.
Long-term damage could be even worse. Small volcanic particles and gases continue to circulate in the stratosphere, causing sunlight to reflect away from Earth. Volcanic winter sets in, very much like the impact winter caused by a large asteroid impact. Global temperatures drop as far as 5 degrees centigrade. That may not sound like much, but that's the only temperature difference that separates us from the last ice age.
Once these horrific events begin to unfold, certainly students of the Bible will recognize them immediately as events that were foretold thousands of years ago that are now coming to pass.
In contrast to the unshakable beliefs of devout Christians, scientists are not as sure of the future.
Supervolcanic eruptions could take place at several dozen localities around the world.
The best that we can do is, if we notice evidence that a major eruption is impending, to clear out the surrounding area and prepare for the possible consequences.
Not very reassuring. One more mystery explored, but still more questions to answer. The next sign is even more mysterious than volcanoes, but every bit as powerful. It's a phenomena that turns the very waters we depend on as red as human blood. Most scientists believe life began in the ocean. But could life also end because of the sea? To believers in the 7 signs, the answer is yes. 2005. The coast of Florida is struck by a huge die-off of sea life. Crews armed with pitchforks and gas masks clean up tens of thousands of dead sea creatures washed ashore from the Gulf of Mexico. In 2007, a similar event infects the coast of Southern California, leaving the beaches littered with dead sea lions, fish, birds, and whales. It is an image that comes straight from the book of Revelation.
The death of living things in the sea. At first it sounds impossible because the sea is so vast, and yet the scriptures clearly prophesy that everything in the sea will die at some point during the judgments that come from heaven. So there's no question it can happen and will happen.
These massive waves of seaborne death are directly connected to the next sign of the prophecy.
And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man. And every living soul died in the sea.
In the second bowl in the book of Revelation, we see all the rivers in planet Earth turning into blood. In the third bowl, we see all the oceans turning into blood.
A wrathful God transforming the waters into blood is a recurring event in the Bible. But what does it mean?
God turns the water to blood, and it causes the fish to die, and it means you can't drink it and sustain life with water. So the idea that blood, which is supposed to be confined in the veins of living creatures, is now in oceans and rivers, is a symbol of the dislocation, the upheaval, the catastrophe that God is willing to bring on the world when he is displeased. And it happened in Egypt, according to the Hebrew Bible. It will happen at the end of days, according to the book of Revelation.
Throughout biblical times, blood has a very powerful symbolic meaning.
Blood has always been, from the beginning of the Judeo-Christian tradition, has been a symbol of great sanctity. It becomes just as important in the book of Revelation. Even the ancients, who had no knowledge of human anatomy, understood that what flows through our bodies and keeps us alive is blood. So that symbol of blood is a symbol of life, and in a more exalted sense, eternal life.
Blood can also be a powerful symbol of death. For centuries, water turning into blood is seen symbolically, but now science offers a different perspective. Can there be scientific truth to water turning blood red? For reasons that remain mysterious for centuries, the oceans and places along the world's coastlines sometimes turn a blood-like shade of red. When this happens, beaches become littered with dead sea life. Everything from minnows to whales perish and are washed ashore. Today, we call these phenomena red tides. Red tides are explained by a leading marine ecologist at the University of Southern California, Dave Hutchins.
Red tide is a common name for a group of single-celled algae that live in coastal water and produce toxins. They produce large blooms that can be really damaging. Some of the organisms that make these blooms actually have a reddish coloration, and when there's enough of them, they can make the water turn literally red, like blood.
In fact, the book of Revelation is written on a small island in the Aegean Sea. It's highly probable that red tides are well known to the local fishermen and to the wider population that reads the prophecies. Given that the sign calls for our waters to turn into blood, it might very well be linked to the phenomenon of red tides. But it will have to be a red tide so unnaturally catastrophic, so extreme, that it can only be seen by many as a sign from God. Can a red tide become that deadly? Again, science offers us a surprising answer.
The red tide algae produce very potent toxins that can kill humans and other vertebrates. And they can literally do the same types of damage that a nerve gas would do.
The big culprits are shellfish, filter-feeding shellfish, clams of any variety, and mussels. These are organisms that basically sit there and they pump water through a very, very fine mesh, and they collect algae in their stomachs. Most of the poisonings that come from algal toxins have the name shellfish poisoning in them. So there's amnesic shellfish poisoning, which causes loss of short-term memory. There's paralytic shellfish poisoning, which causes paralysis. There is neurologic shellfish poisoning, which has respiratory effects. A lot of these things get into our food web by virtue of the fact that we eat some organisms from the ocean that are filter feeders.
A red tide could escalate, and the threat could spread from the food we eat to the air we breathe.
Some types of red tide release the toxins to the water, and they can actually get aerosolized out of the water and into the air where people can breathe them.
That would be like our oceans emitting clouds of lethal nerve gas. The impact on people living near the sea would be devastating. If a gigantic red tide strikes all the oceans at once, a vast majority of sea life on Earth will die, as will the people that eat and breathe the toxins the red tides produce. The millions of other people around the world who depend on the seas for food will starve. The human suffering and death will be mind-boggling. There's no doubt that many would see this as a fulfillment of the 7 signs. Both pollution and global warming are, in fact, upsetting the ecological balance that normally checks red algae growth, fueling a rise in the number and severity of red tides worldwide. If this deadly toxin continues to thrive, it could overwhelm the planet.
If toxic algae win and continue to win and always win, we have a very dire situation.
Those attuned to the prophecy of the 7 signs agree, but for different reasons.
I think what God is specifically saying, he's saying to the rebellious planet Earth, to the Antichrist and his forces, you've martyred my people, you've spilled their blood, you've killed millions of people that believe in God by taking their blood. Now, as a judgment and a final warning to you, I'm going to turn all the rivers on planet Earth and all the oceans into blood.
So this sign really could be a terrifying portent of worldwide killer red tides. It also has a link to our next sign, where again, destruction comes from something that's a direct source of life on Earth. Monstrous earthquakes, devastating plague, dying oceans colored red. All are foretold in Revelation, and all have been witnessed on Earth. These calamities have yet to bring about the end of the world, but are they signposts, warnings that far worse is to come? Evidence seems to be mounting that another sign is unfolding. 1997. The Canadian Arctic, 100 miles from the nearest city. A field researcher begins to notice something alarming.
The changes that I saw unfolding in the Arctic were much too large, much too persistent to be explained away as just natural variations in climate. There was something else at work there. This is real, and it's now.
Giant ice sheets the size of Rhode Island cleave off Antarctica. Hurricanes rage with unimaginable intensity in the Atlantic. Cyclones bring death to hundreds of thousands in Asia. Droughts decimate gigantic regions of the world, and species are driven to extinction at rates never seen before. Could all these calamities be connected to one sign? Revelation tells us the 7 seals bring forth 7 trumpets, and the blaring of the 7th trumpet summons 7 bowls.
And with the 4th bowl, an angel poured his vial upon the sun, and men were scorched with great heat.
Heat, the sun scorching mankind. One of the most alarming signs of the prophecy, and for the scientific community, climate change is unfolding with undeniable evidence.
The Earth is getting hotter. It's warming up. There are just certain physical principles that are inviolate. The physics behind global climate change are very solid. We increase the concentrations of atmospheric greenhouse gases, the planet warms. You cannot escape the physics.
For Mark Sarazi, a research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, the cause for climate change is obvious and man-made.
It became very clear that we were starting to see the effects of global warming associated with rising greenhouse gases.
Everything that we're doing in our activities, whether it's You know, building new cities, putting up agricultural lands, whether it's driving vehicles and putting gases into the atmosphere that we know help warm the planet further, we are causing this planet to warm. It's happening much faster than our models were telling us is going to happen. And that's scary.
But for some religious experts, the evidence of climate change is linked to a larger prophecy, another sign of the impending apocalypse.
Men will die from heat, sun radiation and poisoning, crops, water will dry up. There will be such an intensification of the sun's rays that 50% of the Earth's population will die.
We're seeing natural disasters, unprecedented. When you see on the evening news somebody sitting in the upstairs of their home because the downstairs is flooded out, I mean, it's frightening.
Whether or not they agree on the cause, most scientists and religious experts do agree on one thing. Our planet is heating up, and the effects are catastrophic.
It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And then it's a matter of how severe is it going to be and what are the impacts going to be.
Increasing the Earth's temperature, even by a few degrees, can cause devastating consequences worldwide.
The change is going on very, very quickly. We're going to see a rise in sea level. We are going to see very likely more intense hurricanes. We're going to see increasing drought. You're going to see strife. You're going to see conflict. Increased terrorism as a result of global warming, it's in there in the possibilities.
A rise in temperatures would set off a chain reaction.
What we're going to be seeing is that rate of sea level rise is going to accelerate. Why is it going to accelerate? Largely because we're going to see increasing meltdown of the Earth's glaciers and ice caps.
What's going to raise the sea levels is primarily Greenland and Antarctica. Together, they're more than 90 meters of ice.
A small rise in sea level, just 10 meters, would submerge much of Florida and the East Coast. It would displace 25% of the entire population of the United States.
You might want to consider not living in a low-lying coastal area if you're intending to hold on to your land for a while, because that land might be gone.
Some scientists postulate an even more extreme rise in sea levels, up to 90 meters. That would create a truly biblical catastrophe. London, Venice, Amsterdam, Berlin, even Paris would be underwater.
Once you force a climate system with greenhouse gases, with what's been observed, over the past 100 or so years, you get this amplified warming.
At the same time, the Earth will be ravaged by fearsome superstorms.
Hurricanes feed on warm ocean water. The oceans are warming up. And so therefore it makes sense that we ought to see more intense hurricanes as we move into the future. We're going to see more intense or extreme weather events of other types, for example, thunderstorms. We put this all together and we're seeing a picture of change that humankind is going to have to deal with.
People in developing countries would be affected first. Hundreds of thousands could perish. But nations like the United States are far from immune.
I think we have this arrogance that, oh, in the Western world we're fine, we can deal with any sort of climate change. But, you can look at things like Katrina happening, and we weren't prepared for that. But the reality is I think we're all vulnerable on the planet.
Whether or not we're ready for global warming is a matter of conjecture. But there's no way to prepare for the next sign, a global war that will wipe out most of humanity. The final battle between good and evil. Revelation calls it Armageddon. The final mystery of the seven signs is extremely complex. The book of Revelation is full of dreamlike symbolic imagery and hidden clues.
Bible prophecy is really advanced intelligence from the mind of an all-knowing, all-seeing God. Just like intelligence at the CIA, where you have a little piece of information from one source and a little piece from another, and you have to put it together and connect the dots, Bible prophecy is this way also.
Another factor adding to the complexity of the 7 signs is that there are more than 7 disasters contained within the 7 signs.
We've got 3 sets of 7 judgments. 7 seems to be the perfect number. It's referred to the number that relates to God, as opposed to the Antichrist, whose number is 666.
There is more than one interpretation of the prophecy, which is why others have abused it to mislead followers to their own deaths. Even some religious scholars are unsure about the exact interpretation of the 7 signs.
Whether these things are literal or somewhat symbolic, I think we'll just have to wait and see. We've had plagues, we've had famines previously in human history, so whether these are the exact things that God is bringing about in this age to prepare for this generation, having these judgments, that is just something that we can't speculate on.
But one thing that is clear is the climactic judgment in the book of Revelation. The final sign, Armageddon.
And I saw the beast, and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him, and against his army.
According to Revelation, the first horseman of the apocalypse reappears, the Antichrist. He has come to confront Jesus himself. It is the final battle between God and Satan. Good versus evil.
This war is just horrific in its magnitude. All the nations of the earth will converge at that moment.
Armageddon refers to a specific location.
In the nation of Israel, there is a mountain called Har Megiddo, which means the mountain of Megiddo. And there have been 21 battles for control of that spot. Nations and empires have fought time and time again.
The prophecy of Armageddon has left its mark on history. Some of those battles are fought by crusaders from the 11th through the 13th century. Many of these Christian warriors believe they are, in fact, fulfilling the violent prophecy of the 7 signs.
The Crusades were literally seen as a working out of the prophecies of Revelation, because they were armies under the cross of Christ, moving into the Holy Land, the site of the Battle of Armageddon, and doing battle with infidel armies who they saw as diabolical.
To this day, the Armageddon prophecy continues to exert a powerful hold on people's imaginations. Some of the more knowledgeable believers in the prophecy think we could be on the verge of Armageddon today.
We live in a brutal, chaotic world, so much so that with weapons of mass destruction available and rogue individuals and nations and terrorists and so on, people are afraid that maybe this could be the end.
To believers, the looming threat of nuclear war has always been tied to the concept of Armageddon.
Looking at the nuclear arms buildup, the missing Russian suitcase nukes out of the former Soviet Union, the cataclysmic plagues of biological warfare being stored and manufactured in laboratories, I don't think there's ever been a time in the history of mankind where we have had the technology to literally decimate our world in a matter of weeks or months.
As other weapons of mass destruction have emerged, even secular experts evoke images that echo the prophecy.
There could be nuclear exchange. At which point, to protect our own interests, do we get involved with that or not? And if so, at what capacity? Do we launch strike packages to neutralize nuclear threat? Or do we just say, let's just have at it?
If the final prophecy culminates in nuclear Armageddon, the end will be similar to those caused by a large asteroid impact or a huge supervolcano eruption. The devastation of war will be followed by a nuclear winter, a shroud-like cloud of radioactive debris that will envelop the globe in darkness.
We would now lower our global climate temperature by at least 10 degrees. As it got perpetually worse, we're screwed. And then the prevailing precipitation that would fall in the form of snow would be completely radioactive.
In this frozen hell, we would meet our final apocalypse. But apocalypse doesn't mean our demise. It means something to be revealed. The journey through the 7 signs only appears to be an unending litany of death and destruction. Starting with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, progressing to a mounting crescendo of horrific disasters, culminating with a final battle that could destroy everything on the planet. But to believers in the prophecy, the 7 signs are not a countdown to the end of time. The signs signal a new beginning, a startling and symbolic wake-up call.
The purpose is to grab a rebellious mankind's attention in an effort to bring mankind back to himself.
Are the 7 signs unfolding now? Despite all the evidence, it's still impossible to tell for sure. But there's one thing that can be said. The prophecy is every bit as powerful now as it was the very day of